Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Alien Familiar RPG Podcast. I am Clayton.
And I am Eliot.
Thank you for joining us. Before we get started, you can find show notes and more at alienfamiliar.com. You can email us at alienfamiliarmedia@gmail.com. We are on Facebook at facebook.com/alienfamiliar. And if you would like to help us out with supporting the show, you can do so at patreon.com/alienfamiliarmedia. So if you enjoy our content and would like to help us out with hosting costs, any help you would be able to give us would be greatly appreciated. And today we are going to be discussing adventure design, how to actually write an adventure, and how to make sure that the adventure is something that is of an appropriate difficulty for the players in your group. Before we get any further into this, I kind of want to go into what I mean by appropriate difficulty, because ironically enough, one of the channels that I frequently watch on D&D, just today as we are recording this on July 6th, came out with an episode basically poo-pooing the idea that encounters should be balanced. And I want to clarify that by appropriate difficulty, when it comes to encounters and adventures, particularly with adventures, is I don't mean that it's, quote, balanced. I mean that whenever the players get through it, they will have fun. It doesn't matter if, well, hopefully it doesn't matter if they get through it and it's a horrendous slog and they barely get through it by the skin of their teeth. They have fun doing it. That's the important thing. And I feel like that if it's too easy, then a lot of the fun of the adventure can just be lost. And I don't know about you, Eliot, but whenever I think back on the games that I have played, the sessions that have stuck with me for playing, it's never the encounters where we just, everything just went to plan. The things that I remember are the sessions or the combats or the adventures where something out of left field happened, whether it was something completely crazy that another player did, or whether it was an unbelievably weird streak of dice that caused everything to have to shift just because you had to deal with the fact that either the dice gods were looking down and blessing the group, or the dice gods were looking down and blessing the GM and screwing over the players.
Yeah, well, I mean, and on the other hand, since this is, I'm imagining this is a design conversation, you can never underestimate the player element too. So as the DM, sometimes you can get thrown a curveball by player decision, and that can even throw a wrench in how you choose to balance it and make you put you on your heels, which can sometimes, add to the enjoyment. It can sometimes be those happy accidents, but a lot of times also it really can sometimes make it difficult for you to present a challenging experience that is fun in both, everything you're just describing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and one of the things that I think back on as when it comes to actually being a GM and designing a session, designing an adventure, I actually think back on some advice that my dad gave me that has absolutely nothing to do with role-playing games. This was when I was very first learning how to drive a vehicle. My dad kind of noticed one of the pitfalls that I was falling into whenever I was learning how to drive, and he told me, don't look at what's in front of the car. Watch where you are going, meaning keep your eyes far enough ahead that you can see what's coming down the line. And when it comes to designing an adventure and running a session, this is a motto that I try to hold to. I try not to focus on what is immediately happening. I feel like if I can keep my eyes on the horizon, I'm going to stick within the lines. I'm going to stick within the barriers of what will be fun for the players, as long as I can keep as long as I can keep us on track for going toward the end goal. And the end goal is always for everybody to have fun. There might be different plot points that a particular adventure is designed to reveal or uncover for the players. But every time I come to an encounter where the players throw something at me, like they're interrogating an NPC, either an ally NPC they're just trying to pump for information, or whether they're actually talking with somebody who they have captured who knows something. I try to keep my eyes on that long distance goal rather than just the fact that the player characters are here in this conversation. And I try to use that as a metric for determining how much information I need to give at this point, and whether or not that information will basically course correct to keep us in line with the ultimate goal of everybody having fun. And if there is a particular plot that I am trying to steer this thing into a particular direction, I feel like the driving analogy works really well, because if you're driving a car and you're only focused on what's immediately in front of the car, you're constantly going to be doing some pretty herky-jerky corrections in order to keep your car going where it needs to go. If you're looking ahead and you look up and see this big curve up ahead, you can slowly edge into that curve very gracefully. But if you're just looking at what's immediately in front of the vehicle, you're just seeing, oh, the lines are starting to turn a little bit, so I'll course correct a little bit. Oh, I need to course correct a little bit more. And it's not at all fluid. It's very noticeable, because the GM really doesn't have that easy, light touch that lets the players not even really see the manipulation that's going on in a particular scene.
Yeah, I mean, for DMs out there, should be the goal of every DM for every session, that you are guiding your players towards an appropriately crafted encounter, be that social, be that, combat. And even though, and yet for the players, it feels seamless and it feels by their design. Is that a good summation?
Yeah. And in a lot of ways in this car driving analogy, the players themselves are the road. The adventure itself is not the road. The road is the players. And as the GM, you're guiding the vehicle, which is the plot, forward against the players that are the road. So, that's one of the things in this analogy that I don't think I really, clarified earlier. I can see where some people would think that the car is the players, but no, the players are the road in this analogy.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because your players. See, that's something that for me, that's something that I've had to really come around to the idea of that the story happens by the players unfolding it. It's not something that happens upon the players. It happens at the, triggering of the players. And that's really that is the ultimate goal. That's the ultimate test. Whenever you're treating the players like your car in your analogy, you as a player, you can feel getting jerked around, left, right, you know what I mean? When your GM is really trying to, put a leash on you, I guess you could say. And that's kind of when the game doesn't feel great, it's when you feel leashed and pulled. But yet a good DM can accomplish the same goal and put that leash on the players without them even knowing it. When the players don't even realize that they're following a path or towards a planned outcome, that's the goal. So, the question now is, how do you design such a thing, Clayton? It's something that I feel like it's, we're going to analogies here. I had a boss one time who was explaining to me my evaluation system I'm a school teacher. And he was outlining the different levels of competence on this particular way of being evaluated, and he really tortured this analogy because it was important to him, and it stuck with me, and I've applied it to a lot of things, like your driving analogy, that say, if you can get rated 0 to 4 in our system, he would say that, he's never given anybody less than a 2. Most teachers live in that competent zone in most areas, but getting to that next level up, that distinguished, that peak performance, that's a place you live. And I mean, that's a place you visit, not a place you live. And this is true, I think, for DMing and a lot of things. It's the ultimate goal is that seamless, planned out, perfectly balanced encounter that feels authentic, meaningful, like there's something on the line and the players are engaged and they're guided, or they guide themselves down the path you want them to go, and then it comes off in a way that you talk about for years to come. That's a place you visit as a DM. But how do you try to encourage getting to that place in your planning phase? That's something that I've put a lot of contemplation into over the years as a DM. How do you do it?
I would say that I spend probably 80% of my prep just daydreaming. I don't put anything down onto paper until I've got a pretty good idea in my head until I've spent sufficient time just daydreaming about what could happen from this point forward in the next session, or in the campaign adventure, or the campaign storyline, where I have the privilege of driving for a half an hour into work and then a half hour home from work. It gives me plenty of time during the week to just allow my mind to wander as I'm going through this route that I'm very familiar with. Not to stress the driving analogy too much, but after I've spent a lot of time daydreaming, I decide it's time to start writing out what comes next. I read by John Ford, The 5-Room Dungeon. I've mentioned it before on this podcast as a structure for doing a dungeon, and I really use this for designing my next session and also designing adventures. I may stretch it out. I may add some additional points in the middle, but for the 5-room dungeon structure, all 5 of these points are thought about and go into the design of each adventure. And I'll go ahead and kind of go over the different rooms of the 5-room dungeon format again. Room 1 would be the entrance and guardian. This is how your players get into whatever adventure that they are doing. The guardian is the first challenge that they are going to encounter. This could be a fight, or it could be any number of things. Second is the puzzle or a role-playing challenge of some sort. Third is a trick or a setback. Fourth is the climax, the big battle or the conflict. And then 5 is the reward, revelation, and or plot twist for the dungeon, or in this case, the adventure, as I'm thinking about it. And I also use this for designing my if I do an overarching campaign plot, I kind of do the same thing, only stretched out over the course of however many sessions I'm going to be running the campaign. I'll stretch these out, like, so that maybe in the first 3 sessions of a 20 session campaign, that might be just discovering the entrance and the guardian of what the greater campaign itself is going to be.
Yeah, just listening to you discuss this concept, it's so you're telling me it's like a whole book, like you wrote a whole book about this, or a supplement?
No, this is actually just a 1-page website idea that he posted and has expounded on, and I will be posting a link to it in the show notes. But the amount of text that explains this format is probably about 1,000 words.
Yeah, just through your discussion of it on the podcast, it's greatly influenced how think about game design from the DM's perspective. It's like it's kind of like I don't know. It's like it's like one of those infectious ideas for any DM. I think once you have it presented to you in that way, it's hard to get out, because I remember we had a podcast and I was still running a game, and I immediately went to a 5-point planning kind of approach. And, I don't know that the quality, it didn't really run that long after I started doing that. I definitely felt like the prep was a lot easier built when you're working from scratch. And just the idea of putting five dots on a blank page and filling it out according to this plan really creates a great guide for anybody who's planning on like designing a session. How long have you been using that?
I don't know for certain. I know it's been more than 10 years since I first saw it.
Something I wanted to grab onto that you mentioned in the beginning that I think is a rich vein of a conversation is when you say creating an appropriate difficulty doesn't necessarily mean balanced or equal. What are those turning points what are those considerations in your mind when to make a decision on what is difficult? Because, there are some times, in my opinion, especially like early on in a session or a game or what have you, when it is very appropriate to give your players a lot of success. I think there are times when, as a DM, you have to remember that and this is a trap that it seems obvious, but I fell into this for a long time, that making it to where every single combat was like, an equal battle, like a battle where the players, if you've got 2 or 3 different encounters lined up and that are ready to go, that every single one of those encounters could be an encounter where someone could die or where basically the players lose a lot of treasure, be that in, their resources or just their own hit points and damage or whatever, that every single one of them had to have the life on the line. But at the same time also, when is it appropriate? Or I guess I should phrase it as a question. When do you think it's appropriate to make an encounter almost out of their reach? Is that ever, what goes into those decision making, into that part of your design?
Well, I would say that I disagree with the idea that every single encounter should have a major cost associated with it.
For sure.
There should be some encounters that are, the variety of encounters itself, the idea of having a variety of different different levels of challenge is going to go far in, helping to keep whenever you want a really tough encounter to really tax the players, that'll make it really stand out even more if they've had a few just really easy or just average difficulty encounters leading up to it. That'll make the blood, sweat, and tears of the particular encounter that you want to stick out. It'll make it more likely to stick out in the long run. I would say probably the greatest advice I have ever read in a printed role-playing game book as far as designing encounters came in the 3rd edition DMG. And here is what it says. Quote, an encounter with an encounter level equal to the PC's level is one that should expend about 20% of their resources. The 3rd edition D&D book encouraged and codified that you should not be trying to really hurt the players every single combat. I'm talking this up right now, but it took me a long time as a GM to learn this. It took me probably 10 years to actually learn it, and then it's only been in the past 5 years that I actually feel like I've been practicing it.
Ooh, I think I have a good example of this that just popped into my mind. I think as DMs, we think, I think I get trapped into the zero sum, can I knock down a couple players? This is only a difficult encounter if there's a chance of actually knocking a couple players down, which is traumatic for those players usually, especially when it happens 2 and 3 times a session. But like, if you think about Rogue One, Darth Vader at the very end of Rogue One, and that great scene where he is absolutely unstoppable. It really is an iconic, scene for me. And it appears that Darth Vader is just winning the whole time. And he is. But in reality, he loses that encounter because his ultimate goal of getting to Princess Leia before she escapes fails. And so, that can be something that you can bring into an idea, bring into your fairly mundane encounters. It's like maybe as a game designer, if you can take a goal that isn't necessarily accomplished by their just overall brute strength, you can then still allow the players to feel like, I wouldn't say, because it's not really winning or losing versus the DM, but pushing the plot forward by allowing the players to not necessarily completely accomplish their ultimate goal. Could be as simple as, well, these guys in your way that you owned slowed you down and ultimately left, I guess that would be your plot twist or your revelation or whatever in your 5 points. But, taking that approach, just because the players are, in any game, a party member is going to be it's a superhero. And to me, that's the challenge of role playing in general, is that in a narrative you may have an ensemble, but there's always a main character. There's only one Luke Skywalker. In a role playing game, you've got 3 to, God knows, 8 individuals who have to essentially be the hero of the story. And the idea that some random guy or some random monster is going to come and knock them over is very dissatisfying. So it's really important to kind of create other ways of payoff or, winning and losing that doesn't necessarily tie to your players being overwhelmed in a combat, because it should be very rare that players encounter bad guys that are equal to them and even close, Am I wrong in that?
I agree with the vast majority of what you just said. But I want to go back to your example of that final scene in Rogue One. And if we're spoiling for somebody, Rogue One has been out for enough years now that if you haven't seen it yet and you don't know what we're talking about, I don't feel bad about spoiling it because you're not going to probably ever want to watch it. So my analysis of that particular scene with Darth Vader going down through that corridor with all of the rebels and just literally tearing them up. If we were to translate that into a role-playing game, into one of the Star Wars role-playing games, we would actually see on Darth Vader's character sheet, we would see him taking hit point damage, because hit points don't necessarily mean that you actually got hit. It just means that you are getting whittled down. Some of those quote misses from the blasters of the rebels and stuff, those would have taken down some of his hit points. And he's also spending force points as he's going down that hallway, just tearing through people, like throwing them against each other, throwing his lightsaber, doing different force moves, or using different force powers on them. He is expending resources for his character in order to get through that encounter. And on film, it looks like he is just absolutely dominating. And yes, he is in the Star Wars role-playing game terms, Darth Vader is a very high-level character and has a lot of resources. But he is still using some of those finite resources that he has at his disposal, such as his hit points, such as his force points. He is using those up in that combat, and at the end of that combat, he may look like he is standing there a complete badass, but he is down some hit points. He is down some force points. And that combat did have a cost. And a lot of GMs, and especially me, whenever like before I took to heart this idea that, an encounter should take up a certain percentage of resources, I was in that mindset that if players don't drop, then it's not hard. That is not the case. If an encounter is taking things away from the players that they need to either they can't get back because it's a single use piece of gear, or whether it is something that only comes back whenever they've had time to recuperate, whenever they've had time to take a short rest or a long rest. As long as they are using those resources, it is a challenge. It is taking something out of the players. And I feel like a lot of GMs who are relatively new, and even some who are pretty experienced, like I felt like I was like 10 years ago, whenever I still hadn't quite learned this. Like, it only takes a few encounters like that, a few basically walk through the park encounters in a row before your badass characters are running out of what they have. They're starting to run low on hit points. They're starting to run low on spells. They're starting to run low on gear. They're running low on fate points or force points or bennies or whatever. They're running low on those things, and they may look on to the GM who has not seen any of them go down. It looks like they've just breezed through every combat. They may be one moderate difficulty combat away from just having a total party wipe if you throw too much at your players in quick succession.
Yeah, I mean, imagine if after Darth Vader's, watching the Tantive Ford fly away, he turns around and he sees Obi-Wan. You know what I mean? He would be kind of I don't know if he had a butthole left, but if he had a butthole, it would be really tight, because he would have been in a situation where he's like, oh no, I used all these resources, I'm kind of fatigued, and here's a fresh bad guy, Listen to, and you're absolutely right. Listening to this, though, I want to throw this at you too. As we do, we tend to stay inside the D&D kind of mindset, but the calculus on this conversation completely changes based off your system. And so, and think about it like this. I always envy those young players, or even those young DMs, but definitely a young player who's maybe not young in years, but young in experience. I remember those first D&D campaigns when I was kind of oblivious to the fact that my character was very likely not going to be killed unless I chose for him to be, or I did something very stupid. Or maybe those early, and honestly, this is maybe I'm kind of pitching, it's important to play levels 1 through 5, because in D&D, you don't have a lot of hit points till level 5. You're kind of a little more touchable in those early sessions. And if you're, when it comes to combat, and even a mundane combat, feeling tense, it's so easy to build those tense encounters in a system that's very, say, lethal, or designed to be lethal, like I say, a Call of Cthulhu, or just a World of Darkness game where you're human. Any game where you're playing a human and there's firearms, be it Cyberpunk or the old Chaosium systems, any system that's designed to really be, I guess, realistic in life and try to have a darker, edgier, this calculus changes significantly, because there's almost no way in some sessions or in some game systems to completely take off the table the possibility that someone could get severely injured, in your kind of terminology, that someone could lose the majority of their resources, right? So it's kind of good in a way, because as a DM in those game systems, I think it's easier to prep for, because you don't have to worry about the scaling, godhood of a D&D character past, say, level 10. And, at that point, engaging players in a meaningful way that gives them that sense of tension that I think is the root of fun in a game, it's very difficult. But then you have some systems where, good night, a stray bullet off a no-named NPC could put a player down for days, weeks, kill them. And so it changes, your system really impacts this conversation.
Yeah, the system does have a big factor in how you design this, but I would say that even more than just which system, it comes down to how swingy a particular combat is going to be. Like you're describing the early levels of D&D versus the higher levels of D&D. I feel like you're describing one particular combat and the likelihood that a character will go down within one particular combat.
Well, and using your 20% analogy too, it's like 20% of the resources of a level 1 party is a much different story than 20% of the resources of a party of 10th level players.
Yeah, and I would say that, kind of going back to my point of the swingy combat, once you get into systems, either D&D at higher levels or certainly some of the World of Darkness systems, like I think of the Scion game, like your characters are literally gods in that game, and you can take a lot and you can dish out a lot. The challenge is not in one combat. The challenge is in a series of combats or a series of encounters that press your characters to their limit. Whether it be what they can accomplish, like if there's a time limit, whether or not they can actually, there's not a question of whether they can get through the content. Can they get through the content in the time frame that they have at their disposal? There's different dials you can turn in order to increase or decrease the tension, and it really doesn't matter what system you are in. Those dials are going to be the same regardless of system, but just the dials will be at different settings depending on the system. I feel like the idea that like whether or not a particular player character can go down in a particular single encounter, I hate to say it, but I feel like it's a design flaw if you're depending on the players to like a player to go down in a particular fight for it to be considered a tough fight. There is a particular mentality of players that I have seen develop, and I have fostered this idea in my players in the past, and I have seen other DMs foster this idea in the players in the past, and I think it's a bad thing for DMs to foster. It's the idea that any one, like your next encounter could be the one that takes you all out. At any point in time, the next encounter could take you all out. It enforces the idea that the player characters will do what is called the 15-minute workday in D&D, where they will come into an encounter and they will literally blow everything that they have on that one encounter, seemingly blow through the encounter without being scathed, because they have literally used all of their high level spells. They have used their big attacks. They've used all of their big guns on this one fight. And then they have to stop and rest. They have to take a long rest because they literally don't have anything else. You could throw an easy encounter at them next and they would go down because they have nothing left in the gas tank for that next fight. And I feel like this is a problem that a lot of GMs run into, this 15-minute workday. And in my experience, it is always a problem with the DM. It might not be the problem of a particular DM. Like if I were to play with a brand new group now who I've never played before, but they were all experienced players, and I started to see this happen with them, where they were doing the 15-minute workday despite all of the stuff, all of the work I put into an adventure to prevent them from having to do that. I would then blame it on their previous DM who taught them that they have to, this is the way you do D&D. You have to throw everything you have into a particular encounter, because that previous DM, they only believed that the combat was difficult if a player went down.
Yeah, this was something that you and I worked out in that Strahd game, because I was very much, and if I had to say that I did have a bias, I do bias towards combats should be, that in order to create the tension I say combat very narrowly, in combat, not other scenarios of like encounters, but I'm definitely cut from the cloth that in my mind it's like if you don't feel like your character is on the line, then that takes away some engagement. But I've come around to the idea, because putting myself in the first of all, that's a lot of effort for the DM. I mean, to prep a session's worth of encounters, where at any given encounter they could have a difficult time. But so it's something I have definitely put a lot of thought into. And the reason why I bring up the Strahd game too is, recently I've been goading a couple of people or in my local area. We're flirting with the idea of playing an in-person game. Oh my, God forbid, right? I've thought that maybe I should run the Strahd campaign again, since it would be easy. The second time around, at least, I'd be more experienced. So I've been thinking about looking back on the last go around and what I would do different. The one thing I think that a DM needs to remember, that I certainly struggled with, was, I know that there's certain gamers who like to bag on the DM that's very descriptive, that worries about mood and tone in the room. But I think that is a next level play. Like, if you can impart the tension through your description, because, in Strahd, it's meant to be very unsettling. Barovia is meant to be a very eerie place where the world itself should feel a little uneasy. Now, me as the DM, I know that it's very unlikely for a certain party to actually have anything serious to lose, say if they're traveling through the countryside. But it's still beholden on me. If I've done my due diligence and set it up, your description, the way you present your world or your game to your players, should be enough to set that tension and that mood, so that when any encounter pops up, regardless, it still feels like a tense moment or something you're invested in. That has everything. If you're relying on your combats themselves, the mechanics of it, the actual tabletop laid out version of it to inspire some sort of fear or tension, if that's the only element you look to for the players to get any sort of investment, that you're probably cutting yourself a little short in your prep on actually planning for the mood and planning for the story and planning for how are you going to get across to the players that they're in an unsettled place. You know what I mean? How are you going to get them in that mindset without actually approaching them with something bad?
Yeah, and as far as establishing that mood, in particular with Curse of Strahd, my advice to somebody who is running that and they feel like their players are just powering through everything, I would advise, instead of beefing up the existing encounters, just add more encounters. Because the horror, the dread of Ravenloft comes from feeling like everything you're doing is just not quite enough. If you have some tough encounters and you beat them down, but you just barely get through it by the skin of your teeth, that feels hopeless. It feels like, man, I'm never going to be enough to get through all of this. But if you have a bunch of, quote, balanced encounters, and the player characters can see their hit points are getting whittled down, their spell slots are getting whittled down. Yes, they get through the fights, they take a few bumps and bruises along the way, but they look ahead and see, okay, I'm down to just a couple of spells and half of my hit points, but we've already been through 3 encounters so far today, and we've got this 4th thing that looks like it's going to be an encounter coming up. That instills dread. That's not the scariness of a swingy combat where the player characters might go down. That's the dread of, is this next encounter, is it going to be a bridge too far? I really feel like the part of the horror of Ravenloft is the player characters seeing that they need to be the heroes here and knowing that they need to press on in order to be the heroes, but seeing that there is this attrition of their resources and questioning whether or not they've still got enough in them for the thing that they see coming up over the horizon, rather than, oh wow, that one battle was really tense. The tension will come from seeing a threat coming rather than, oh my God, we're in combat with a bad threat.
I mean, yeah, I was listening to what you were saying. It just was filling my mind. Like, especially looking, since we're on the topic of Strahd, I know that not everybody's playing Strahd, but you can apply this to any sort of mood you want to set. But say you're in a horror setting, something that I never really seized upon, that looking back on I would definitely do differently, was in order to, adding a complicating factor into a very linear, progression can be so enriching for the drama of a story. So for instance, in Strahd, there's so many NPCs, but so if you're making it yourself or whatever, so make sure you spend a little bit of time engaging the players in non-combat encounters to where they can actually build connections with, say, NPCs that you may not even have any plan. They may actually lead to something, they may not, but give yourself the opportunity to where your players finally bite on a plot hook and they're going in the right direction. It's, they're really charging off and maybe as the DM, you maybe want to put the brakes on a little bit for your pacing or whatever. Or if you want to add a little bit of extra drama, have a familiar NPC be an encounter on the road. I'm horrible about, I hate random encounters. And so in Strahd, I typically didn't run them. Looking back on it, and in any game going forward, I've learned that a random encounter should never be random. But it should reflect the fact that, shit happens in real life. So, yeah, you and your party, you finally put the puzzle together and you're charging off to go accomplish the goal. Well, maybe on the road, a familiar NPC's been attacked by werewolves or zombies or bad guys in whatever setting. And maybe you've introduced an element to where all of a sudden now the players are, they're put in a moral position where it's like, do we save this person? Do we hinder ourselves by detouring maybe to take them to a safe place? And then the next thing you know, say the werewolves come back to finish the job, and that's the random encounter. You as the DM know, and maybe the players even know, these bad guys can't touch us, but they're not here for us. Our goal isn't to defeat them for our safety. They're here to threaten this very vulnerable NPC, and that becomes the encounter. And then it just completely changes the tone of the game, because you as the DM, you're not even pretending to the players that they're really the ones in any danger. But that doesn't mean that they're not going to lose that encounter in a meaningful and dramatic way if they're not able to protect this vulnerable person. You know what I'm saying? And that's an example of an encounter that can be very meaningful or maybe impactful to the players. It has nothing to do with threatening them with any sort of real danger to themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. The best way to instill fear and dread in a player character is to put them against something that can't be punched.
And that right there is super difficult. We're running long in the tooth. I know we're getting on, but go on and talk more about that, because I've got some questions about non-combat, quote-unquote, encounters and playing them and designing them as, quote-unquote, encounters in the way we think of combat.
So, as you were describing horror, it got me to reflect a little bit on the greatest horror one-shot that I have been in a game that Jordan has ever run for me, where I was a player. This horror one-shot was set in Star Wars. And this one-shot was, we were told at the beginning of the session, you are all younglings at the Jedi Academy, and Order 66 has just been ordered. At the beginning of the session, we learn Anakin is walking through the corridors of the Jedi Academy. And we're all younglings. None of us have any lightsabers. None of us have hardly any force powers whatsoever. The entire session, this entire adventure, was us escaping the Jedi Academy and knowing that this big bad monster was hunting us. There were stormtroopers there. Also, those stormtroopers were not anywhere near as frightening as the idea that Anakin is walking these corridors hunting us. The entirety of this, that's the entirety of what we played through, was our characters basically scrambling from location to location, trying to find our way out, trying to get contact with another Jedi or somebody who would be able to assist us, trying to find a way out of this situation, because we were, to translate it into another setting, we were trapped in a haunted house with a big bad monster. The house was the Jedi Academy and the monster was Anakin, and there was not a goddamn thing that we could do about him. And so the entire struggle of the session was us fighting amongst ourselves about what we were going to do and how we were going to escape from this situation. And I'm pretty sure, I don't know this for certain, but I do know Jordan. I'm pretty sure that Jordan had no idea how we were going to get ourselves out of the situation. I'm pretty sure he just let the situation flow with us coming up with ideas on how we might be able to get out and rolling with it as exits got blocked by clone stormtroopers, or we caught sight of Anakin. We actually caught sight of Anakin at a couple of times, and my character actually had Anakin take a swipe at him at one point. Because we had the knowledge, we had the metagame knowledge that this is a foe we cannot take. We knew that out of character, and we knew that in character, because in character, our characters knew Anakin is this pretty tough Jedi who has been in the Clone Wars for umpteen years now and is on the Jedi Council. So we knew who he was, and we knew his potential, and we knew that he was hunting other Jedi younglings because we had seen him killing them.
That sounds terrifying, and in some ways that defines a lot of what we've been talking to. So, it's everything needs to be taken within the context of how many sessions are you running. One shots are very different than long form campaigns. Had you guys been dumb enough to run straight at Anakin, Jordan would have had to have killed you all, and there should not have been any sort of flexibility on his part as the DM to make that an achievable encounter, right? I mean, there are some times where it's appropriate to just put a meat grinder in front of the players and just say, if you're going to jump in it, you're going to get ground into meat. Yeah, right. I mean, there's a place for that.
Yeah. And in that particular, scenario, all of our characters did in fact make it out to safety. However, one of our characters did go over to the dark side in order to get out. They had to draw upon the dark side of the Force in order to basically get through an encounter, in order to that allowed the rest of us to get through. So even though we all survived, it was at a great cost.
And the thing that I wanted to tie that to, because that sounds like an amazing game, and it sounds like it was spent a lot of time in combat rounds. Now, I'm currently trying to wrap my head around a completely different style of game. The Dune, the current iteration of Dune, made by, Modiphius. And I've been reading through that book, really kind of approaching it like, man, do I want to run this game? But it's so different, to the point where combat encounters are only one types of quote unquote conflicts. And the game very much discourages leaning too heavily on any one form of conflict for your game, to the point where it even builds into the game different theaters, of encounter, to where you may even have multiple party members, not even in the same space. So by that I mean, it doesn't set up the game as if it's in a spatial way, like 10-foot squares or anything like that. It's zones, and you, as the DM, you have to set up so many zones for your players to interact with. And there is rules moving between zones. So say you have a palace intrigue game and all of a sudden there's a surprise assault on a compound. Well, one player might be leading a tank battalion in defense of the exterior way of the compound, while players on the inside might be rooting out some traitorous subterfuge that needs to be dealt with. So the players might not even be in the same physical space. And it very much encourages role-playing encounters as your conflicts, and it definitely does not, design itself in a way where there even needs to be a sword-on-sword or, physical confrontation for a game to be set up. I find that really difficult to design, because when you're not in combat, I feel like in most games I've played, combat stats are something everybody has. Now, not everybody might be the star of the show. The rogue might not be, able to outshine the paladin in a melee combat, but the rogue's going to have an important place in combat too. Just like all the players in most games have a combat facet to their character sheet that allows them to play a meaningful part in combat. Whereas, on the other hand, in most games, there is not combat prowess. You've usually, at that point, you have social skills that players are good at, maybe some sneak skills. Usually when it comes to skill challenges or the non-combat encounters are usually adjudicated through skills and abilities. And, in my experience, it's been you either got it or you don't. And so it's difficult sometimes in my mind to design an encounter that's not or design a session that's not gonna dip into combat at least once, maybe twice. Because in my mind, I feel like you're leaving any other types of encounters can sometimes be leaving other party members behind. How do you, just kind of generally, what are your thoughts about that combat, non-combat balance for a fun game, and how to include players who maybe don't have non-combat skills dedicated to their character sheets?
Well, it sounds like the Dune system is built around the players. It has plenty of options for players who are not in combat. I would hope that would be the case, that there's variety in is it a point-based system, or is it like some sort of class-based system that you build your characters?
No, it has a point. It's very lightly a point-based system in that you have, I can't remember what they're called now, but you have basic attributes and you have skills, but you may only have a couple. The character sheets are very light and they're pretty well balanced. So, there's not going to be a lot of attributes that you're horrible at, and you're going to have a couple that you're great at, and then you're going to have some backgrounds that you're really good at. But what's interesting about the setting, and I reserve the right to be wrong about this, any uber nerds out there who are totally I'm butchering the system. I'm very having a hard time wrapping my head around the system right now. That's why I haven't actually started trying to run it yet. But it introduces this idea of assets, and you get a certain number of assets, and those assets are basically kind of like your equipment, but they can also be kind of like feats in other systems, perks. So you might, if you're a Fremen, your crysknife would be one of your assets. And so if you were in the position where you had to do hand-to-hand combat, you would have to rely on the crysknife. Say you didn't buy a hand-to-hand, like I could see, say, a Bene Gesserit priestess may not have a hand-to-hand weapon kind of asset, maybe a Gom Jabbar, but whatever that was. But I could see a lot of different characters not having a martial asset. Well, that's going to limit those. That character's not going to be designed to ever want to be in a physical combat ever. Maybe ever, the whole set game. And to me, that's really intimidating as a DM to have to think in terms of how can I run this game in a meaningful, fun, anxious way, but know that I've got, a couple members of this party who are just not ever going to seek to be in a combat encounter, while other players, that's where they've put all their focus. How can I run these multiple theaters simultaneously without leaving people bored? You know what I mean?
In the Cortex Plus system, I have a I have the rules for the Leverage role-playing game. In that game, it's based on the TV series that ran in the mid 2000s up until like maybe into the early teens, I think. Maybe not even that long. But in this TV series and also in the role-playing game itself, each player is one of, it's been a while since I've seen the show or read this book, but I want to say there were 5 basically classes. There was like the heavy, which was like a bruiser type who was good at combat. The thief who was good at like thieving type stuff. The face, I know it wasn't called the face, but it was basically the grifter is what it was called, who was good at like basically social manipulation. And there was the mastermind, who was the person who came up with the elaborate plans for how everything went. And then there was a 5th one that I can't remember off the top of my head. Each one of those was a class in and of itself. And each one of those classes, they had some small ability to do the things that were available to the other classes, but really you didn't want anyone but the heavy to be in combat. So you were encouraged to design the adventure around the fact that the thief needed something to do in the course of a particular mission. So you just went at it with the idea that combat is literally only going to be a 5th of the encounters that they come across. The other 5th is going to be the social situation where they have to smooth talk other people. And then there's a 5th that's also going to have to be the very skills monkey in rogue type character in D&D, who is going to be picking locks and sneaking, like climbing things, breaking into offices, breaking into buildings. The hacker was the 5th one, and the hacker is going to be defeating the security systems and stuff like that. Each one of these different roles has to have something to do during the course of the mission. So I would say as you were getting ready to do Dune, as your players are making their characters, find out from each one of them what exactly is your thing. What is it that your character does? And make sure that you put an encounter in each adventure, a proportionate number of encounters in each adventure that really highlights what they do and allows them to put their dice on the table for that thing that they're supposed to be good at.
Yeah, and that's, and I think that's good advice for any game system, too. I mean, there's nothing that's going to hurt you as a DM to take a little bit extra time. And if you've got like you've got a fairly bland encounter, give the thief a lock to pick, or give the thief, build in a way for them to gain stealth very easily, or give the rogue an option to just stop throwing their bow or sneak attacking to accomplish some other thing. Give the bard the bard, gosh, I don't even know what to do about bards, but I don't know. Give them some way to interact. I mean, D&D 5th edition, I guess, does an okay job with bards with their spells and all that stuff to be a support class, but there's nothing wrong with giving players options to be useful in other ways, in combat specifically. I think your players will appreciate it.
And even outside of combat, making sure that you have all of the different roles that your player characters have fulfilled, making sure that they have something that they can do. If one of them is really good at lying, but another one is really good at telling the truth, or like diplomacy or persuading people, make sure that there's different things that need to be done. And like the liar can't, for some reason, the liar just telling lies isn't going to be able to get something. Somebody needs to be persuaded to do something. really any adventure, if you can know who your players are playing, what characters your players are playing ahead of time, really tailor each adventure to what they have on their character sheets and what they in their minds think that they're going to be doing.
Wholeheartedly agree.
I don't know if I actually answered your question about how to design adventures for the Dune game, though.
Well, that's a tall order since you haven't even, like, I don't think have you even looked at it?
No, I have not.
Yeah, it doesn't, and not to rip on them anything, it's a different type of game. It's a very modern style of game design. Jordan's a lot more familiar with a lot of different systems, and whenever me and him were talking about it, it's in a vein that's very new. And so for old heads like me, it's definitely can be kind of like getting you out of your comfort zone. But it doesn't bode well for a game when during your initial release. I found they've recently released a quick start guide that's about 25-30 pages long that just gets to the down and dirty of the rules, and it very much reads as a supplement that was demanded by maybe some outcry from critiques of the game, because it's a very dense. It comes out and it's not laid out in a way that I prefer, and so they've released a very brief, get to the point kind of quick start guide that's actually a lot more palatable for your average gamer to read and understand the system.
They've done that for each one of their systems. I know I've got the Star Trek quick start guide on my computer somewhere. And also the Conan one, and I can't remember any of the other games by Modifius. But I'm sure I've got the quick start guides for them.
Yeah, I definitely want to run it. It looks interesting.
Well, do we want to go on to geek things now?
I think that'd be I think that's fine. I'm curious to know what yours are.
Well, my first one is one particular YouTube video that I found, although the particular channel itself would be good for anybody who was interested in this. The YouTube video is titled How to Create 100 Distinctly Different Voices. And this guy is a voice coach and a dialect coach. His entire channel is about how to make yourself better at speaking, but also singing, and how to get into how to portray different characters. Definitely an acting, a channel about acting. But anybody who likes to do voices, or even somebody who in role-playing games doesn't like to do voices, that thinks that they can't, I would recommend you watch this video, and you can get some tips on how to do different voices. Because it's not just making your voice sound funny. It's all of the different mannerisms that people use in their speech, that, or not necessarily mannerisms, just the different styles of speech, and combining the different styles together in order to create 100 distinct different voices that you can do. I've been going down a very deep rabbit hole of, differing advice on how to change your voice for acting and stuff like that. And, in addition to this, although I don't have any one particular channel that I've been listening to, there is a lot of really good advice if you want to try to change your voice and do a character who is a different gender than you. If you want to try to do that, I highly recommend listening to any one of hundreds of YouTube channels by trans people on how to do that exact thing. And these people are really good at it because it's their life to do this. So there's a lot of really good information about changing your voice available on YouTube, and it just takes a little bit of practice and you'll really be able to up your game.
I've always been so hesitant to do female voices. I don't like doing it at all. My geek thing is, I've been watching the Kaminsky Method on Netflix. As a quickly approaching 40s, 30-year-old, with more gray in my beard than I'm comfortable with. And I find it reassuring, it's been a great show to, put a comedic bent on getting older and aging. And it's weird. It's a really great show for anybody who hasn't seen it. It stars Michael Douglas, who's the face of the show, but Alan Arkin is just the diamond in the rough of the show. He just plays his character like a grumpy old man, like we've all known, and like it really humanizes grumpy old men in a way that's really, I don't know, it's weird. It's made me like empathize with some of the older generation of my family that I've known who are no longer here. We grow up thinking that our elders are these unknowable statues from another time, and that's the face they put on it for us. But it's a really funny. It's just, I highly recommend it. Anybody I think it's better for people who are maybe getting a little bit on in age, but who knows? I'm sure young people could find some fun in it as well. But highly recommend it. Kaminsky Method.
All right. I have one other thing I want to plug. Kyle Driscoll, KD, who used to be on this podcast, has started a new podcast with his, with Kenneth McNulty. Their new podcast is called Just Two Not Brothers on Spotify. Their podcast, at the time of recording, there is only one episode out, but the idea behind their podcast is they're going to be exploring different fandoms and going into particularly like extended universe information about them. For example, the first series that they are doing, they're going to be talking about all of the extended universe for Star Wars, like all of the books and stuff that came out for Star Wars that's not in the official Star Wars movie and TV series canon, but all of the extraneous stuff that has come out over the years. They're going to be discussing that. And if they ever get through Star Wars, which there is a whole hell of a lot of Star Wars stuff, I think their idea is that they're going to be talking about other fandoms with similar like expansive universes built out from them. I don't know for certain whether or not they're going to be going into like fanfic type stuff, or if it's just going to be sticking to like ancillary published stuff. But if you enjoyed listening to KD on this podcast, I would definitely say check him out on Just Two Not Brothers podcast.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
And with that, Eliot, what do you say we stop this bullshit and start rolling some dice?
Let's do it, my friend.
This has been a production of Alien Familiar Media. You can find past episodes and more at alienfamiliar.com. You can email us at alienfamiliarmedia@gmail.com. This production is protected under a Creative Commons non-commercial attribution, no derivatives license. Music for this episode is Suburban Outlaw by Forget the Whale and can be found at freemusicarchive.org.